Welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf. I'm Samia Aziz, celebrating the power of literature and the voices of authors and changemakers from the global majority. Join me as we explore the stories that inspire, connect, and transform our world. Let's uncover the stories that truly matter together. This week, I'm speaking with the brilliant Ibtisam Azem, novelist, journalist, and storyteller, about her powerful and thought-provoking novel, The Book of Disappearance. This is a story of Palestine, set in Jaffa and also Tel Aviv in modern Israel. This novel asks a haunting question: what if all the Palestinians suddenly disappeared? Through the intertwining narratives of Alaa, a young Palestinian man who vanishes without a trace, and Ariel, an Israeli liberal Zionist journalist who finds Alaa's diaries, the novel explores themes of memory, identity, and erasure. It's both a deeply personal story and a profound political meditation on history, belonging, and loss. In this conversation, we delve into the layers of metaphor and meaning in the Book of Disappearance, the historical and political realities that shape the narrative and the ongoing situation in Palestine. We also reflect on storytelling as resistance and the role of literature in preserving memory, and the weight of silence in both personal and collective histories. I really hope that this discussion sparks reflection and conversation for you as well. Let's begin. Hello, Ibtisam. Welcome to the Diverse Bookshelf. It's such an honor to have you on the show. I really can't wait to speak about your work. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Thank you for having me. The honor is mine. I'm really delighted to be with you and to go into this journey. Very excited.
So today we're going to be talking about your novel, The Book of Disappearance. And I know that you originally wrote it in Arabic, and I'm not an Arabic, I'm not fluent in Arabic, so I read the English translation. And it's just a really phenomenal book. It's fairly short, but my gosh, does it pack a punch. Like, it is very, very powerful. So the premise of the book is that we are basically in Israel. We're in Tel Aviv for most of the book, and in the current timeline of the book, I should say. And what's happened is that all the Palestinians across Palestine, across Israel, everybody has just disappeared, and it's complete panic and chaos. And what we see is one of our characters called Ariel. He discovers the diary of his friend or somebody that lives in his building, which is full of personal diary entries and letters that this character, Alaa, has written to his grandmother. And these are really, really phenomenal, very personal letters to his grandmother, asking really big existential questions about their family history, about Palestinian identity. He's haunted by his grandmother's experiences of loss. You know, she's a survivor of the Nakba. So these two things are happening at the same time. And we only really meet Alaa his through his diary and through his letters, although we do meet him very early on in the book in the first chapter. It's such an interesting concept, this idea of disappearance, but also your decision to have this style of writing, this form of the book, where it's not just that we're given two perspectives. What's interesting is that the perspective of Alaa is actually also narrated by Ariel, in that he's the one that finds the diary and he reads it and he responds and he reacts to it also. So,
Mm.
what inspired both the premise of the book and your decision to present it in the way that you did?
First of all, thank you so much for your generous introduction. And but let me start from the last part of your question regarding the disappearance and how the whole idea of disappearance even started. I was, as you said, the book was published in Arabic in 2014, so I worked on it for about 3 years before that. And the idea came to me. I was listening to an interview with an Israeli politician in a Western media program. I think I can't remember anymore if it was British or American. And I think it was the Jerusalem mayor, and he was asked about the situation in Jerusalem, about some demonstrations, and he was talking. And basically, for me, he was lying about the situations of Palestinians, how they are equal, that there is no discrimination against them, etc. And that made me angry. But what made me angry wasn't the fact that he was lying. Let's put it this way, straightforward. But the fact that he was left unchallenged by the journalist, because politicians uh, always, to put it mildly, don't tell the
Don't
truth.
tell the truth, yeah.
Yeah, or mostly. Let's say, let's be careful. Huh? um, but the fact that he was basically completely unchallenged, and that was what made me angry, among others. And I started writing an article about that. And while I was writing and researching, two things came to mind actually. One, when Yitzhak Rabin, back then Israeli defense minister, said that he wished, that was in the 80s, end of 80s, I think, during the first Intifada, and he said that he wished that he would wake up one day to find that the sea has swallowed Gaza. And then there was another thing I remembered during research and brainstorming, was Benny Morris, who's an Israeli historian. And in an article that, not article, an interview that was published with him in 2003, I think, in Haaretz newspaper, and it's also accessible in English. Uh, uh, he was the interview was in the context of a new edition of his book about the Palestinian refugee issue. And in that, he basically, in that interview, he did say that he thinks, in the context of expelling Palestinians back in 1948, he said that he thinks that Israelis should have finished the job of displacing the rest of Palestinians. As bad as it is, he does say it. And if you look at that interview, the journalist was a little bit taken back by that, and he repeated his question to him: "Are you sure? Are you saying?" And he said, "Yes, it's bad, it's awful, but at least we wouldn't have 20% of citizens of Israel now are Palestinians." So thinking about all of that, the question that came for me: what would happen? What would Israelis do if the Palestinians and so-called enemy disappears? And Israelis, as a settler colonialist, society. So that was the idea behind that. But I took it a little bit way further, as you alluded to in your introduction.
Yeah. And it's I mean, I don't like, I'm not familiar with the interviews that you've mentioned, and oh gosh, they're absolutely horrific, but it doesn't surprise me, right? Like, if we look at what has typically over the years been spewed out by the Israeli and also the Western media, like, these things have gone unchallenged for so long. And I really love that you kind of took the almost like your reaction to that and built on it, because this book is not a reaction, it's not reactionary, but it's I guess, like, based on this idea of thinking about these awful things that have been said, because actually what would happen if all of a sudden the Palestinians were to disappear. And I find disappearance to be such a just a fascinating concept. And in the novel as well, it's both literal and metaphorical or ideological in many ways as well. So we have the literally you wake up and the Palestinians are gone. Um, and we also see in the opening chapter of the book, Alaa's grandmother has gone missing, and that is a form of disappearance. And she passes away, and again, death is a form of disappearance when you're no longer here on this earth. But then we have this erasure, the erasure of Palestinian identity, the erasure of history, the changes in names of places, the sort of suppression of language. All of these are forms of disappearance and erasure. And I guess, my question is to you, like, when we think about disappearance, or when you think about disappearance with regards to Palestine, what to you does it really represent and signify?
Um, Many things, really, and I think you did put your hand on many of these issues very beautifully. I think there is a tension that arises in the fact that uh, I think every Palestinian who lives, whether on historic Palestine or outside, live in the presence of the absence, as the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish put it. But as I touched briefly upon it in my previous answer, I wanted to take this beyond talking about only the Israeli society as a settler colonialist society, etc. I wanted to go back and talk about what I, as a Palestinian who grew up there, who still have the family there, um, who goes, I mean, I go every year, I'm going soon there, etc. I wanted to talk about something that very often is, I wouldn't say forgotten, because forgotten sounds like an accident. Something happens and people just forgot about it without no intention to do so. I think there is an amnesia, a deliberate not talking about what's happened in the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe around 48, 47, actually before that, but let's say that was um, the event that influenced every Palestinian for the rest of their life until today, and the continuous of the Nakba. So I wanted to bring that subject, the meaning of what does it mean that you live under settler colonialist system, under apartheid, under what does that mean for your daily life? Because we see often in the news, as much as there are attention when they're on Palestine again and again, sometimes for the wrong reasons. We don't know much about how do people live there 24/7. How do they acclimate? Do they love, marry, mourn? So there is all these aspects that was important for me to bring back to the center to talk about memory. And the importance of memory for Palestinians, and to be honest, also not only for Palestinians. We can take the question of Palestine and also see a lot of parallels with other peoples in many other regions of the world, whether the natives in America where I live, or in the Middle East, in Africa, Algeria, South Africa, etc., etc., and many. And the importance of the memory as an alternative, as to the official history that many of these states try to tell, yeah, and erase and whitewash what happens and happened and is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. You said some really, really important things there about historical amnesia and memory and history, and the need to, I guess, like, challenge mainstream narrative, but also the absence. Like
Mm,
what is missing? So much is missing, let alone the harmfulness of what is being said. What is not being said, I think, is equally as important and
yeah.
powerful. I want to talk a little bit about the character of Allah because he is very interesting, I think, and I feel like we only really get to know him through his diary entries, and which are letters that he writes to his grandmother, which are so full of emotion, so
Mm,
much pain, so much loss. There's I think, he's writing letters to his grandmother. She's not around anymore. I think there's a lot of grief and a lot of questions that he knows he will never get the answers to. um how do you think his relationship with his grandmother shaped his view of the world, but shaped his own relationship also with Palestine?
mm. No, that's an extremely important question, and has also an enormous importance for the novel, because I want to take a step back and go back to, which is connected to the also the issue of disappearance, and connected to the history of his grandmother. And we have to remember why we talk about the Nakba and the continuous Nakba. Um, now, as you know, in 48, 47, the vast majority of Palestinians, and that's according to UN numbers, more than 750,000 were displaced, were ethnically cleansed, forced to leave the country, their homeland, not allowed back, despite having until today UN resolutions like 194 that talks about the right of the refugees to return and right of self-determination, etc. And they are valid still until today. This is why we have about more than 5 million Palestinians and children and grandchildren, etc., of these refugees within in Palestine, but also in neighboring country that's still living there. So that's one thing that's important to remember. These people were um, on top of the people who were killed and massacred, etc. But the rest, some of them stayed in their homeland. The one who displaced and kicked out were not allowed back. And then there is the erasure of the literally uh, erasure of and destruction, according to historians, more than 500 Palestinian villages, mostly on the coast, but in other places, were completely destroyed around 47, 48, and the years later. And that's 500. That's almost half of the Palestinian villages that existed back then. Um, and you can see some of this, some of the ruins when you go around in many of these places, including Jerusalem, including in the coast near Haifa, Jaffa, etc. But there used to be also about 11 Palestinian towns that coastal towns that were completely, almost completely emptied, partially destroyed. We still have the old architect, etc. And Jaffa is one of them. And sorry, completely emptied, mostly emptied from their Palestinian inhabitant. Cities that had sometimes 100,000 inhabitants, the majority of whom were Palestinians, ended up after 48 having 5,000, 4,000. Like,
Mm,
imagine, these numbers are enormous.
mm,
And now enormous, and but even in the measures of 80 years ago, almost 80 years ago. So going back, making, sorry for the long answer. Going back to your question regarding the relationship with the grandmother and how important she is. When I grew up, Palestinian citizen of Israel who were forced to get the Israeli citizenship because they survived the Nakba and they stayed in their homeland. Uh, they have they have Arab schools, which means the language they are taught in Arabic. But when I went to school, um, we didn't learn about our own history, let alone about all these facts that I told you.
Mm,
Nothing was mentioned. The
mm,
perspective of the history of the creation of the state of Israel on the land of Palestine, the destruction, nothing was taught to us because the colloquium is from the perspective of the Israeli government.
mm,
In literature, we learned Arabic literature, all classic and modern, but we hardly were taught any text by Palestinian poets or novelists, etc. Most of it we got it from outside the school, from parents, from grandparents, and this is where the grandmother and the oral history plays an
mm,
role. And this is where Alaa, in the novel, starts to see what the official history of the colonizer about his own homeland, what they say, what he's taught, and what he's told at home.
mm.
This is how important this oral history for him and for the collective Palestinian.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yeah, because I mean, it's clear throughout the book that he's really absolutely haunted by these stories that he's heard throughout his entire life, and he keeps going back to them. He keeps going back to different points of his grandmother's life and the different um the sort of the different loss and the layers of loss and the layers of grief that she experienced. And there's a lot of reference in the book about being an orphan, being made an orphan, and not necessarily in the typical sense one thinks of when parents pass away, but when your homeland is taken from you, when your identity is taken from you, when after the Nakba, and how just that completely changes your perception of who you are and where you are. And we really see that Allah is like just struggling to understand also his own place in the timeline. He's actually living in Tel Aviv, and we know that Palestinians living in Israel are basically second class citizens. They don't have the same rights as Israelis do in terms of their status as people, but their movement, their job opportunities, their living conditions, everything is impacted. And one of the things that I liked, because it would have been very easy for this novel to be about the disappearance and the impact on Israelis and how Israelis reacted to that. But through these letters, you've actually helped us delve into the Palestinian history and the Palestinian narrative and stories, which I think is so important. Um, we don't we don't need to sit too long with the Israeli perspective, although it is pretty much half of the book. But it was very, very. I think that balance was really great. Um, we see Allah struggles a lot, and one of the I think the most like heartbreaking things. You mentioned earlier that we don't really understand when it comes to the way that people live in Palestine. We don't understand, how they love and how they marry, and what their funeral rites are like, and what they eat, and all of that kind of stuff. And love and marriage comes up in this book as well, and it's a question for Allah. He says to his grandmother, you ask me why I'm not married, and I tell you, oh, I'm not being lucky in love. But actually, I I question, I wonder myself, like, why would I want to bring another Palestinian into this world? And reading it was so gut wrenching and horrible, because immediately we don't want to think that. We want to think about the Palestinian, the bloodlines continuing and people feeling empowered and excited and happy to continue their family lines and continue their identity. But actually this this signifies something really deep and really dark about how difficult it is to exist in Palestine and exist in a being oppressed by a settler colonial state. And I wondered if you could just talk about your decision to include that thing in particular, because it's very sad to read it. We're reading this man that has denied himself a happy future, because that there has been love in his life, there has been people that he's been interested in, but held himself back. So what
Mm.
was behind that decision to for this character to feel that way?
I agree with you that it's one thing that this character decided to do, but at the same time, the character is Alaa is also an evolving character, in the sense of we are learning about his struggles, about his back and forth, about his relationship to the homeland Palestine, and what does that mean, and how you can decolonize your own um, um, uh, not your own beliefs, but the belief, what you were told at school by the official narrative about your own homeland. So he's going through different period, and that's one of these periods. And it's a sad thing, but this is what literature also does sometimes. It doesn't give you an answer to something, but it shows the struggle that people go through. And that it's a normal thought that people also think
Mm,
when they live, where they are born, grew up, and assume that their life will continue to be under this system. They try to change it, and when you try to change it, there is hope. And we saw there is hope, and but it's a struggle that you go through when living in such a situation. But I wanted to, um, uh, in regard of your question, also to touch on um, the issue of silence. How
mm,
the majority, because we have in any society, you have the elite that take these decisions of to go to war, to colonize people, to do this, they benefit. But I always ask myself, why is what happened to the silent majority? Why do people decide to accept the unacceptable? And we look today at the genocide in Gaza. Uh, we, everyone, no one can claim that they don't know what's happening in Gaza, really. In 48 and 47, you can say, okay, maybe people didn't know, they were not maybe, although that's not true. A lot of Palestinian survivors talked about it, a lot of historians, intellectuals, etc., etc. But today, I mean, which excuses people have? Um, but I think I had drifted a little bit away from your, sorry about that, from your question.
no, I think I mean you make a very interesting and a very important point about silence, and actually this book is about confronting Israelis with the erasure that they ignore. Even the liberal Zionists like Ariel in the book, right? Who doesn't, he says that he doesn't want death to all Arabs, for example. But at the same time, he is complicit, he is silent, he knows what's happening, he can see what's happening, but doesn't do anything about it. And also doesn't but we don't get the sense that he even feels like he should. Like we can see that he is conflicted in some parts. But as a whole, there is so much that, I mean, Israelis in particular, not even mentioning people outside of Palestine and Israel, but is so much that Israelis ignore, not just because they believe whatever's being told by their media, but this sense of, I guess, like, well, this is just how it is, and this is how it has to be, and this is where we need to be. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, and I wondered, what did you really want to bring out about that? Because in the book, when the disappearance takes place, it is very much like they are confronted with an a disappearance and erasure, and obviously, like, there's then like uh conversations in the media about the Palestinians and the Arabs, and we see that although they have disappeared, the Israelis do not feel safe. And I
Mm,
mean, that in itself, I think, is a phenomenal reminder. Like, as a settler colonial state, you are never safe, right? Because this is not your land. Like, you know what you've done. This is not your land. You know that even if the Arabs were to disappear, you're not going to be safe. Um, but what did you really want to explore, I guess, with the confronting of the Israeli population?
I think there were many things. As I mentioned, touched upon at the beginning, is how would a society, in this case, the Israeli society, but we can say this also about the American society or any settler colonial state, how do they deal with the fact that their so-called enemy disappear? What does that mean for their myth of creation, their state, etc. But I want to, but it was, but there is, like, for me, one of the things I wanted to do in the novel, there were two things also. To hold a mirror uh, from two sides. Like, one side is to show a past, something that did happen already, that an erasure did took place. Remind everyone that we are here where we are because it didn't come from a vacuum. Why we are here today in Gaza or in the West Bank or in other parts of Palestine, and also kind of warning and
Mm,
talking to a possible event that could happen, similar to the Nakba and expulsion of Palestinians from in a mass numbers from
mm,
their homeland. Because what I was seeing as somebody who lived there and grew up there, that there was, okay, there was a Nakba. When Palestinians talk about continuous Nakba, what does that mean? It means that it never actually stopped, because massacres and destruction of villages, confiscation of land, occupation of the rest of Palestine in '67 continued. Um, and what we see today, and there is something that's happening, what I would call, I don't know if you can call it like this, like kind of the silence Nakba that's happening
mm.
in the background constantly.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? I mean, like, if you look about the situation of Palestinian who are citizens of Israel, the Palestinians before 48 in general, they used to own the majority of the land of Palestine, whether individual or collective property ownership. Uh, the Palestinians, for example, citizens of Israel, they make about 20% of the population. The land confiscation went so far so that we today have a situation where they don't, collectively and individually, they don't own more than 2 to 3%. And that's important. That's happened, didn't happen. There were so many laws that Israel, and the same program is going actually in the West Bank, because, and it happens in ways like through house demolitions, like constantly in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, what's going on in Jerusalem? You hardly hear anything about Jerusalem, but the the people of Jerusalem, they are, the majority cannot have permission to build new houses. So if they do, uh, usually their houses get demolished. And it's not only Jerusalem, also the West Bank, and all these issues are very well documented by the UN. And yet, uh, uh, and yet it sounds like I'm talking about a fantasy land, but actually, no, this is what's has been happening before the last war on Gaza, like in the last year and a half or almost years. So, um, so what I wanted to do is to confront, to talk, to bring back the Palestinian narrative, and that brings me to the, sorry for my again long answer, to the Alaa's chapters. It is true that Ariel find them. And we start reading them through what Ariel is reading. But I wanted to make a point that in which the Alaa's chapter, the Palestinian character, um, are separate from Ariel's chapter and other chapters. So the reader, what the reader sees, doesn't get filtered directly through the Israelis. It's actually you read what the Israeli character is reading in the same time. So there's a
Mm.
parallel time that's happening, and we have the Palestinian voice in separate chapters, independent, saying what he wants to say without waiting to listen or to convince anyone anymore about his truth. And that was something that it's very important for me. There is engagement later in other chapters, but these chapters of the memoirs are usually separate. Um,
Yeah, and I think what's really important to know about those is that these chapters are not Ariel remembering something that's happened. So these are not skewed by his memory or influenced by his ideas. These are letters, diary entries that Allah has written. So these are untouched. These are untouched by an outsider opinion, whether that's an Israeli or it's a media, whatever it is. It is
yeah.
actually Allah's words without him physically saying them like they're written. And I think that that's such a powerful thing to remember, that
Mm,
this is not somebody's memory. This is not, although Ariel is reading them, these are not it's not his perspective in
yeah.
any way, shape, or form.
And he
Um,
tries to take over them later at the end of the book when he
yeah,
starts to write his own book, quoting some of them. We
yeah.
don't need to spoil
Yeah,
it.
we won't spoil it. And I just want to touch a little bit on, you talked about this like silence Nakba, and I think it's so, there's been a lot of writing fairly recently that is calling for a shift in the way that we talk about the Nakba. That for so long the Nakba has been referred to as an event, a one-time thing that happened that was terrible, and then everything that happened is like a post Nakba reality. But it seems but like there's this idea that like it happened because the Nakba happened, or after the Nakba happened. But actually, what a lot of academics and people are calling for now is an understanding that actually the Nakba is ongoing. Maybe it started at a certain point. Maybe it did start in 74. Who knows? 78, but 48. Oh my god! But it didn't. But but it's ongoing, and it's changing, and it continues to happen in lots of different ways. And actually, I remember speaking to a British Palestinian author called Isabella Hamad,
Mm,
and she at the time was saying that she was visiting Palestine maybe once every year or every 2 years to the West Bank, and she said, because I'm not there so much, when I go, that I notice the change more. And she said the thing that I notice every time I go is how close the settlements are coming. That, maybe like 10 years ago they were really far in the distance, whereas like now I feel like I can throw a stone and they'll be there. And it's just this reminder that actually it is still happening, it is still evolving, it is still progressing. It's not an event that happened at one point in history, which is I think also we see that through the character of Allah as well. Like he's not just reflecting on his grandmother's memories. We're seeing how he is impacted and how his life has continued to be impacted every single day, essentially. And you do, obviously, like we have the character of Ariel, who is for all intents and purposes, a liberal Zionist, and he struggles a little bit with his with his history and his belonging, and we see that he's not always on the same page as his family or people. He's a journalist as well, and there's too much to say about that. But what was it like for you? I think putting together his character.
Mm.
What did you decide that you wanted to have or to explore about that perspective?
I always find it interesting, especially when it comes to liberals, or so-called liberals, whether Israeli context or American, or even probably the British. uh, and Because the contradictory in many of these positions, and is enormous. And in the Israeli context, is that many of uh, of uh, many of them will talk about the West Bank, the occupation of the rest, or the occupation of the rest of Palestine in '67, but they don't want to talk about the core of the issue, the reason why we are here, about Zionism as a settler colonialist movement, about the Nakba and before that, etc. And They don't want to do it because they don't want to confront the hard and the real question about what's happening and about their own existence. So it was important to bring that uh, to because to bring that to the center. But it was for me to build these character. I mean, there are other characters that more right wing, more left, whatever. But these two major characters to show also the hypocrisy, uh, and that was part of why it was important for me. And also, if we put that in a broader context, um, and to look, and if we look at facts on the ground are the following: Israel controls Palestinians and Palestinian land from the river to the sea. There's one um, legal system by which Israeli Jews are governed, no matter if they are settlers, if they are live in mainland Israel, or if they are in the occupied Palestinian territory in '67. One system for Jewish Israelis. There are four different legal systems for Palestinians. Uh, so one that discriminate differently in different levels against Palestinians. One, as you mentioned, touched upon a little bit before, Palestinian citizens of Israel. I wouldn't even call them second. How do you call that?
Second class citizens.
Second class citizens. Yes. Uh, I don't know, like, there are so many laws that discriminate against them, including on a language level, including on buildings, confiscation, money, rights, even to describe Israel as a Jewish state, and to ignore 20% of the population who were indigenous to the land says a lot. You have a law, like nationality law, that was adopted in 2018, that doesn't allow Palestinian citizens of Israel to take part on major decisions when it comes to the so-called character of the state. God knows what does that even mean. But then you have another legal system that govern Palestinian in the West Bank, which means the way they move, where they are allowed to build, etc., discriminate against them in a different way. And then another set of laws for Palestinians in Jerusalem, and the fourth one in Gaza. But no matter which laws and set of laws and regulations we take, there's discriminations in different levels, and it changes, it shifts. So, for example, in between 48 and 1948 and 1966, there was a military rule in that governed the Palestinian citizens of Israel. So they, for 18 years, they were not allowed to move freely between the cities, exactly a similar situation that we have today in the West Bank. So they had to get work permission to go to other cities, big cities. They had to go to there were checkpoints, etc., for 18 years. And these were called citizens. So that all comes together to try to reflect it in different ways.
Mm. Yeah, that's really, yeah, really, really interesting. And it is, I mean, I said at the beginning that the book is like quite short, but it packs a punch, but it is so multi-layered, and it really explores the different types of oppression, the different types of disappearances and erasure, but also just different experiences, and you can't in any one book cover everything, but it's really really quite phenomenal. um so we do, the main female character that we interact with in the book is Alaa's grandmother, and she's really the only, we see his mother early on in the novel, and then we learn a little bit more about her through his letters. But the main one is Alaa's grandmother, and you talked a lot about oral history and the importance of that. But I'm interested to know just generally about women and like
Mhm.
women's stories and female influence in your own life that have impacted your writing.
I mean, the grandmother in the novel, inspired by my own grandmother, uh, who was one of the main, together with my father, but she was the person who, she was originally from Jaffa too. She was internally displaced. In the book, the character stays in, she stays in Jaffa, but in my real life, my grandmother was internally displaced and lived about 30 kilometers north of Jaffa, but never was allowed back because of different laws that the present absentee law that Israelis imposed. Her house was destroyed, etc. So I grew up with her memories about the city, and we used to go together to Jaffa, and she will. And to her neighborhood that was almost completely destroyed. But she remembered the old streets, the neighbors, and we will be walking as in a parallel world, and she will point this where here lived an ex family. We did this, we did that. We drank coffee. We she will describe all these women that she knew, that were her friends and neighbors, and they all disappeared. Majority of whom became refugees or displaced in different countries, and her own family, like my mother, had. Only one aunt. My grandmother and her sister were stayed in historic Palestine, but the rest were displaced to forced to leave to Jordan and Lebanon. So you can imagine for societies like ours, uh, what does it mean for women to have to go through all the struggles of life with her husband, with his family, etc., without having any family support of
Yeah.
her own. um, and uh, and she was the one who she loved really to laugh. She was very funny. Um, Despite all what she went through, she is somebody who really brought also hope to me and to my life. So, and and a lot of Palestinian women are actually like this.
Yeah.
They're very strong. They learn to very quickly, despite all the challenges we face in a patriarchal society. But Palestinian men, of course, also suffer under the occupation and colonialization, and we need to say that. We need to point this out. But women, I think, have also the burden of maybe double suffering. And then it becomes even more complicated when we talk about class and poverty and then etc. So all these aspects, yeah, are important. And um,
Mm. And you spoke, yeah, your grandmother was from Jaffa, and in the book, Jaffa feels like another character. Like it's
yeah.
so it's very important in the novel, but it's also like so vivid and like it, it's huge in the novel. And I just wondered, how was it like for you to build that
Mm.
almost a character of Jaffa?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love Jaffa a lot, not only because my grandmother is from there, but it's a very beautiful city. And in general, Palestine is a very beautiful country. Uh, with and but Jaffa, I took Jaffa and Tel Aviv for a very important reason. Jaffa symbolized the city of it was the most important Palestinian city, or one of the most important Palestinian cities, until 48, 47. What does that mean? It was one of the largest. It has around 100 or 100, a little bit more inhabitant, majority of whom 70, a little bit more, were Palestinians. Um, so out of this around 100,000, only 4,000 survived and stayed. So imagine, it's a huge number in 1 year. But also Jaffa was a very important cultural center. A lot of newspapers used to be printed there, theaters, cinema, an important economic center. So there was a lot going on there. And to have this vanish was important for me to bring it back. And we see that through the architect, like the design, all these different things that come up in the novel. On the other hand, you have Tel Aviv as a symbol of the settler city. It is even called the White City. It's an expression
Mhm.
that refer to the Bauhaus architect. But the interesting thing when you write a novel and you research also stuff, you come across new things and new ideas. And I always was interested about um, the Bauhaus. And then you find out that actually in Europe, that kind of architecture was a symbol of working against fascist idea, fascist, etc. But when it came to Palestine, with time, it became a symbol of colonialization, and all these things. Also, when we talk about forests, or when we talk about plants, many of the forests you will see now in Israel, many of them are built on top of these destroyed Palestinian villages. So there is also the Zionist movement tried to make, and and a lot of other colonialist movements did in many other places in Algeria. And so they brought all these trees from Europe to make Palestine look rather a Mediterranean European landscape, which were actually really bad for the environment because they needed more water, etc. So this all come together to show how actually settler colonialism work in a very complicated way.
Mm.
It's all over, to see all over the place, and
Yeah,
the history of Jaffa is part of that.
yeah, absolutely. And I just think, like, throughout the book, what I appreciated so much was that you address both collective
Mm.
erasure and collective identity and collective memory, but also personal. And I remember speaking not too long ago with Mahmoud Muna, who is the bookseller of Jerusalem,
Mm.
and
Yes.
he's worked on a collection of essays called Daybreak in Gaza. And he said that it's very difficult actually for Palestinians to sort of promote personal personal identity or personal history or personal experiences, because so much is about collective identity. It's about the Palestinian narrative and the Palestinian history, but actually individual experiences are equally as important, and they need to be told. But I just wondered if you could reflect a little bit on that sort of importance of talking about both personal identity, memory, and erasure, and collective.
Collective and individual memory, they are both intertwined. But yet, as you said, it's important to emphasize each uh, one of them um, also separately, because we don't want to end up having, because there are so many Palestinian stories that need that we're told, but so many others that need to be we need to tell them and to talk about them. And I said about the grandmother character that it's inspired from my grandmother, because when I didn't want to make it only about my personal history. It was important to bring other aspects of other women's life into that character, to make it not only for more intense and strong, but also to bring. So I conducted interviews for that novel with other Palestinian women, and aspects of their lives also are there in the grandmother or other characters. Uh, and to talk, to go back to the individual, is also important because Palestinians, as any other society, they are very mixed
Yes.
in their beliefs,
Yeah.
in their background, in everything. So they're not. They're just so, like,
Yeah. It's not a monolith. It's not a Palestinian.
They're
Yeah.
rich Palestinians, they're right-wing Palestinians. I mean, it sounds like they're poor Palestinians, they're working class, and they're city people,
Mm.
and urban, and farmers and Bedouins and different religions. um, and it sounds banal, or like, I don't know, sounds like, okay, that's we know that, but it's actually, a lot of people forget that. And this is where literature also comes, and literature is important and plays an important role to bring these so many rich and different aspects into life. This is where literature also uh, plays an important role to to um, to dig deeper into people's life, and
Yeah.
what's happened when when cameras are not there anymore, when journalists go away,
Mm.
when historians or research people who academics don't stay with them. This is the artist and the novelist and the creative writer who um, live in these worlds and try to bring them to life
Yeah.
back to the reader.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so you wrote the book in Arabic, and it has been translated. And as I said, I've read the English translation, and I'm sure you are well versed in the English translation. I don't know how involved you were in the process, but do you think in the translation of it anything has been lost? Like, do you think that, or has it been changed? Because I always feel like it's not going to be exactly the same as what you've written in Arabic, because translation in and of itself is not just about finding the equivalent word, right? Like
Mm.
it's very complicated. Yeah, and so yeah, I wondered if you feel like it's different in any ways, or if there were any challenges when it came to the translation from Arabic to English.
No, I mean, I really love the translation. And Sinan Antoun, who translated, he's himself also a poet, a
Mm.
novelist. He translated also Mahmoud Darwish. He's Iraqi, and to be also honest, he's my partner too, my
Okay.
husband. And he knows my process of writing. We talk to each other, but I wasn't. But even if we are not married, I mean, Sinan is somebody who knows the Palestinian and the Arab culture very well, and so he didn't need that relationship to be able to
Mm. Of
also
course, yeah.
to do it. Um, I read the drafts and I did like it. So it was his work, and I do believe that it's. And we talked about here and there about some things, but I wasn't actively involved, and that's good for me. I mean, I like that because if you trust the translator. And if you trust that they're going to do a great work, then translation is also a creative act and process, especially literary translation. So if you have trust in the translator, you should leave it to them, and then of course you should read it, etc. So I really loved it. I don't think that much lost. It's of course there are some. It is in a different language. I think, but the beauty of it that I really loved reading also the English translation, and I think one of the beautiful things that Sinan tries to do is also to reflect my style in the original Arabic as much as it's possible, of course, and the English language would allow. So that was something important. The only thing, but that's nothing has to do with this translation. The only thing is that my dialogues, they are very short, uh, but the dialogues in the original Arabic are in spoken Arabic. Uh, so which means in spoken Palestinian Arabic, which and there are different dialect within the Palestinian dialects. But of course, with this, when you do the dialogues in dialect, um, it reflects a lot of issues regarding class, education, the area that the
Yes.
person is
Yes.
coming from, neighborhood, maybe even. So that doesn't, and to be honest, probably that is something that Arab readers from outside Palestine will not even, if they are not
Mm.
with the details of the Palestinian dialects, will not pick up on probably also. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Mm. Well, that's super interesting. And actually, like, I've loved reading it in English. And it's off sometimes, I mean, quite a lot, to be honest, with translated fiction. When you're reading it, you're very aware that you're reading something translated because it feels maybe sometimes slightly disjointed, sometimes slightly, maybe like a little bit reserved. I feel like we don't get the full style of the author,
Mm,
especially if you know a little bit about the author or you know about their work. I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of a mismatch. But I have to say that with this, I felt like the style and like the flair of the writing really came through. Like I mean, I knew that it was translated, but it didn't come into my mind while I was reading it.
no, absolutely.
Yeah, and I thought it was a really, really, really great job. But yeah, I'm always very interested to know because it's such a difficult task, and it's an art in itself
Mm,
that's creative, but there's a whole different set of like, I don't know, pressures and responsibilities when you are translating. It's very difficult, I think. And it does make me feel like, you know, the Arabic language is so diverse and so robust in a way that the English language is not. The English language is very limited, and it's not as poetic as the Arabic language is, and it's not, you know, it's so very different. And to translate one into the other, I think, yeah, I mean, it was done very beautifully.
I
But
know.
yeah, so great. But
No,
yeah,
I'm really very thankful for his translation, and also for the world of a lot of people maybe don't know about how difficult it is to publish translated literature in the US. It's just unbelievable. And I think in Europe too, but in Europe less. I mean, I think it's a little bit better than the US. And a lot of translators, especially those who translate from non-European languages, are hardly, usually, let's say, not well paid. They have difficulties, no matter how well known they are, difficulties also of finding major publisher, and usually a lot of translated literature from the Arab world, but I think it from many other languages in the Middle East and Africa and um, and Asia are mostly published either by small publisher or university press publisher. That's a subject for itself, really,
yeah,
the translated literature.
yeah. Well, Ibtisam, it has been such a pleasure speaking to you today, and, you know, about your work. But yeah, it's been a real honor speaking to you. So thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you, and it has been an honor for me to be with you. I enjoyed this conversation a lot, and wow, we time passed like.
Yeah, it flew. It flew. Thank you so much.
I thank you so much. Thank you.
I hope you loved listening to this episode and found things that will stay with you. I'd love to hear from you, so please do reach out on social media, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review, as it can really help.